substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 or 200, the politics, media, whatever you want, podcast, whatever you get from it. It can be that. It'll be that for you. We're back to a regular schedule, 2024. I think this is our second episode of the year. I'm joined by my co-host, Ollie. Welcome. How are you doing?
Kia ora. Doing very well, thank you.
And two very special guests, returning guest, Emmy Rākete. How are you doing, Emmy?
I'm doing so grim. This is the immensity of the suffering in the world.
And just for our audience who haven't heard you before, who somehow don't know who you are, where are you coming at this from?
Yeah, so my name's Emmy Rākete. I'm the press spokesperson for People Against Prisons Aotearoa, which is a prison abolitionist community organisation. And I'm also a newly minted lecturer at the University of Auckland in the criminology department. Yeah, you're a hard. I don't know what like our sports mascot is because I'm not that kind of lesbian. So, but I presume I've got one. And whatever it is, I support that creature. So yeah, I guess I have to become I'm already a Māori nationalist and I'm already a third worldist, but I guess I have to be like a University of Auckland nationalist now as well. So let's go. AUT, terrible. Really pleased to be here.
And we're also joined by Dylan Asafo. How are you doing, Dylan?
I'm all good, thank you. All things considered. But yeah, it's grim, like Emmy said. Yeah.
And just again, for our audience, what do you do? Where do you come from?
Yeah, so I'm a lecturer in law at University of Auckland, where Emmy is. My big area of interest is race, colonialism, and the law, which has me studying all sorts of stuff, like abolition, climate change, hate speech, colonial constitutions, just basically anything that pisses me off and makes me angry. There's no rhyme or reason or logic to my areas of interest. Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. The big question for the podcast today is around academic solidarity and I guess organizing and activating academic spaces around some of these big issues. You're saying, Dylan, that your area of interest is whatever's pissing you off at any given time. And a few weeks back now, you helped to organize an open letter for academics to show solidarity with what's happening in Gaza. Do you want to take us through what it was about for people who missed it, and I guess the process around how you stood that up?
Yeah, sure. So the open letter was from staff, students, alumni from all of the big 8 universities in New Zealand. It was addressed to the vice chancellors of these universities, basically urging them to release a joint statement in solidarity with Palestine, condemning Israel's genocide and calling for a ceasefire, and beyond that, an end to the occupation. It was really inspired by the University of Melbourne's letter that was also championed by the union over there. And so I guess the strategy behind it, I don't think Melbourne or even myself and the folks involved with the letter were under the illusion that the vice chancellors would ever take it seriously. They can't even address racism and white supremacy, colonialism in way less tense times. So expecting them to do it now, that wasn't our thought. It was basically just to put them on notice, to make it clear to them that they do have an obligation to stand in solidarity with Palestine, and also to serve as a list, I think, to our Palestinian students and alumni and staff, so that they know who is on their side, that they have people that they can go to if they're facing any backlash from Zionists for speaking out or dealing with any Zionist bullying. So the Google form went out. I think to date we have about 2,600 signatures. It's been sent multiple times, I think about 4 times now to the vice chancellors. No response, no acknowledgement or receipt. So at the moment, we're just strategizing about how we can continue to put pressure on them with our unions in just other ways.
And this is against a backdrop of just ludicrous. And there aren't words anymore to describe the destruction in Gaza, but just this morning, Israeli occupation forces demolished the last university. And I genuinely don't know what else to say about that.
I have a friend, an internet friend, who's a doctor, who I think has been coming from a really similar place to where Dylan and I, who obviously have been feeling about this, right? Which is that we're part of this like international community, right? Like of academics. We have a uniform. We literally have like a shared costume that we all kind of inherited from the medieval university. And we talk big about this international community, and it's the same with doctors, right? They have the same process that they go through. There's a shared kind of like brotherhood. I think women are allowed in the brotherhood now as well, which is nice for us. And we talk big about this, right? The academic community is like a subject. It's like a political subject which is supposed to exist. And then we've seen that actually you can just call these people terrorists and massacre them in the most atrocious ways, tear the buildings down. And in the West, suddenly that community is totally fictitious, it's completely evaporated. And nobody is willing to do anything, right, in defense of these people who are our siblings. And so I think, yeah, the letter to me, I was really, really proud to be able to sign that for the reasons that Dylan talked about, right? That it shows, first of all, it's a way of building some kind of force, some kind of pressure that we can try to shove our enemies and try to bring some pressure to bear on the Zionist entity, try to stop it from behaving in these ways. It gives a lifeline to other students and staff who are directly affected by these atrocities to say, hey, we're with you. I think there's one other reason that I was really, really proud to sign it, right? And something that Mao Zedong talks about in this article that he wrote called, and I always get the order wrong here, so I'm just going to paraphrase and fuck it, look it up on Marxist.org. But it is not a bad thing, but a good thing to be attacked by the enemy. Is this point that Mao makes over and over and over again, that you want your enemy to hate you. And I think that we're often afraid to be loathed as academics and as people. Frankly, I think New Zealanders in particular are really bad at conflict, but we should want our enemies to hate us because we hate them. And we want to clearly draw, like as in as sharp relief as possible, the distinction between us and our enemies, to say we are this and you are that. And if our enemy is attacking us, that means that we're doing a good job of that, right? That we're clearly distinguishing between what is good and what is evil and uniting around goods that we can fight, so we can fight against them. And so I was really proud for all of the reasons that Dylan talked about to sign this. But I was also proud to sign this to say, this is me. This is what I'm willing to fight for. I'm this. And if you hate me because I'm signing on to this, fucking good, say that so that everyone understands the lines that have been drawn here, right? You sit over there, we will all sit over there, and then we can properly have this out.
Absolutely. And I think that, you alluded to people in New Zealand not being particularly good at these kind of conflicts, and just having a base set of values so that these arguments aren't, or are harder to have via a set of proxies, which is how we tend to do politics, especially antagonistic politics here, means something.
Well, I think Kiwis in general have a slightly strange sort of aversion to the idea of antagonistic politics. We have a very like woo-woo, love everybody, be kind to each other sort of mentality, to the point where even Labour like tried to turn that into a slogan. And I think like that politics is not about love. I mean, there's a component of love to it, but it's as much about what you oppose as it is about what you uphold. And I think this idea that we can just sort of yuck it up with these self-styled conservative comedian types like David Seymour or Chris Bishop, where they're like, hee, I'm just a funny guy, I'm just a Kiwi bloke, and it's like I don't find that charming. Like last week, you tried to take food out of my kid's mouth. Like I'm not charmed by you. I don't think it's cool that you're out having a beer with your mates. You're not just some bloke to me. You're my enemy. You're my political enemy. And I think people are, they're a little bit wary of making this kind of comments because it sounds, I don't know, maybe it sounds a bit try-hard, maybe it sounds a bit overly intense, but it's until you start sort of understanding that these people they're trying to hurt you, then you won't be able to sort of oppose them in any way that really matters.
And what's happening in Gaza is such a clear-cut case, right? For most of us, that I don't know if I can call it a good starting point, but it's something that helps to tease out that reality that these people have a public persona where, they're going and having a beer and watching your favorite band and splashing it all over social media, and then they're going to go to work and they're going to fuck you up. And somehow those two things are seen as completely separate entities. And it's just not the case.
Yeah, 100%. I think in the context of universities, there's this idea of the benevolent university, this liberal construction of it as a place for academic freedom, that it's the critic and conscience of society. But I hope what's becoming really clear at this moment is that universities as structures are the intellectual and research arms of the colonial state and corporations. And if our universities aren't taking a clear stand against genocide, a genocide which is clearly and proudly broadcasted and advertised, then we need to have a real serious think and reckoning with what universities are, and the work that they do and the functions that they serve. Like for me, working at a law school, I'm really mindful that this is, in essence, a training ground to train and educate the Crown's lawyers, the lawyers of the state, lawyers of corporations, and even those lawyers who end up working for the poor and working classes, that they swear an oath of allegiance to the Crown upon being admitted to the bar. So we need to antagonize the university. And I know Emmy and I are saying this as people who work within it, but we need to also normalize antagonism within our students, and radicalize them as much as possible, because the university is doing really important work for New Zealand and other settler colonial states, Israel and the US, by remaining silent, and God knows what else. But yeah, we need to encourage that sort of questioning and that reckoning within our students and broader communities.
It's funny too, because the conservative grievance with tertiary education so much is that it's all about indoctrinating young people into Marxist ideology and such, and there's so much panic to the point that I remember, like, when I was getting ready to go to uni as a young guy in a very conservative family, I had most of the people in my life like fiercely discouraging it, because they're like, everybody goes to university, they lose their faith. That's the that's the sort of the conservative worldview. But when you actually look at how they operate on like a day-to-day at a sort of top managerial level, they're very very reactionary, very conservative. We were talking earlier about the idea of finding a sort of a mascot for the University of Auckland, and maybe the most appropriate would be just like a giant plush version of ONG Glenn, because to a degree that is really the real politic. That's what's actually running the university. And the fact that people getting a sort of higher education, the fact that people developing their critical thinking skills happen to then start developing more sort of left-wing politics is an unanticipated side effect of that. It's just that's what happens when you learn new information, but it's not necessarily what a lot of the people in those sort of decision-making positions are hoping for.
And we've seen that ramping up over the last, I mean, it's been going on for a decade, right? The attacks on academics. It's a classic line of attack by right-wing entities. But with the stuff happening in Palestine, it's really become much more out in the open. And you're seeing it happen in New Zealand as well. We had Jeremy Moses from Canterbury, University of Canterbury, on the cast. Also was in a position having to write an open letter because he and other academics were being smeared and their jobs attacked by the Israel Institute of New Zealand. Right-wing AstroTurf group, essentially. And it hasn't, as far as I know, it hasn't been as bad here, just yet. Like these are joke organizations who are trying to make these attacks, and everyone kind of knows that they've got an agenda. But in places like the United States, and I think in the UK to some extent as well, they've been much more successful in attacking academics and getting them removed from roles from lecturer all the way up to leadership positions at universities.
Yeah, so they rolled the head of Harvard through this weird harassment campaign by sort of like critiquing her dissertation. And by no means am I going to get up here and say, oh, we need to defend like Harvard University, right? But I think what it shows is that our enemies are, not committed to any principle, really. They'll do whatever they need to do in order to attack, I mean, so Claudine Gay was the one who was rolled. She wasn't even out here saying like, well, you got to hand it to PFLP, they're doing great work on the ground. She just wasn't sufficiently critical of Israel, and they managed to replace her for that. I'm sure a lot of the people who were going before the House Un-American Activities Commission also weren't fantastic principled revolutionary communists, but allowing these people to get rolled gave our enemies the strength to keep going. And we ended up seeing a general purge of the left out of public life in the United States, and a really crucial juncture in the struggle between capitalism and socialism. And I think we're seeing the same thing happening here. You pointed out that it's not as intense in New Zealand as it is in other countries, because here our right-wing cutout groups are basically these like collections of like weird Batman villains. They've got backstories and stuff, man. Like some of the transphobes genuinely are like the weirdest, like fell in a vat of poison gas and like came out like the Joker came out wrong. Yeah. And so they're not as powerful in this country as they are in the US, right? And I think we can think about like why that is. So Israel is a colony of the US and is like a forward operating base for US imperialism in the Middle East, a means of kind of keeping this massive, friendly, hyper-militarized power right on the doorstep of Iran, Lebanon, Syria, all of these countries over which the US needs to project power if it's going to maintain control over the OPEC countries. And so when Americans point out that Israel is this like ethnic supremacist, hyper-militarized, racist apartheid state, that directly threatens the interests of the American ruling class. And so you get these like doxing trucks showing up outside universities, like showing the personal information of students who participate in Palestine rallies. In New Zealand, we're luckier than the American working class, right? Here, like their interests of New Zealand's capitalists aren't directly tied to the interest, like Israel. Israel's got very little to do with New Zealand's ruling class, really, in an immediate way. But New Zealand's ruling class does need to preserve its relationship to the US. And so we're seeing like a very, very half-assed pro-Israel kind of assault here, right? The Israel Institute, that's the best that they can manage. Like these guys are bloggers. We are bloggers, for fuck's sake. And so I think this is like a strategic advantage for us, right? We're like, thank God that this is a white country, yeah? Because what it means is that we could break New Zealand away from Israel. We genuinely could do it. There have been moments all through this country's history where we've been able to really, really attack them. New Zealand, years ago, Murray McCully, who was the MP up on East Coast Bays, did something at the UN, I can't remember exactly what he did, that directly criticized Israel for being an apartheid militarized racist state and caused this like big blow up. And he was a right-wing, he was a national politician, right? So because New Zealand doesn't directly need Israel in the way that America directly needs Israel, New Zealand, I think it would be possible for us to be able to push the New Zealand government to strongly criticize or break ties with Israel. And the thing that is so great about that happening, the thing that would be so great about that happening, is that in the eyes of the West, we are the West, right? This is a white country formerly. And so if we can do that, we can be like the first domino, right? We can be one of the first core countries from within the bosom of the empire to say, hey, these guys are freaks, and hopefully be kind of that first bold voice that will help some of these other countries who, for whom Israel is also deeply unpopular, help some of these other countries peel away too. It'll be really tough, and we're seeing how tough it is right now, right? But there's no, I think, direct economic factor, as there is with America, that's going to make it categorically impossible for us to be the first off the block. I think we could get it done.
And there's reason to be optimistic there too, because we have flirted so much. We've come so close on multiple times to actually being one of those countries to formally recognize the state of Palestine. It's been floated in Parliament more than once. Labour have at one point declared their intention to do so, though I believe they ended up retracting that.
They did. They pussied out as soon as Operation Al-Aqsa flood was carried out.
Yeah, so we're not as bad off as some places. Our ostensibly left-wing majority sort of party still is open to some of these ideas, even if Hipkins doesn't have a spine. So yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I like that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, compared to Australia, right, where they've got their ostensibly left-wing government in power and are just rabid.
Did you see that Albanese founded Parliamentary Friends of Palestine? He founded it. Ooh. And now,
so we've got,
yeah, we've got like a better brand of spineless lib in this country, I think.
Not like, yeah, great. Fantastic.
Ours are just cowards. They're not like mendacious cowards, at least. Yeah.
But what can we, we're doing these open letters. I think there's probably more organizing happening across the academy than I've seen in my lifetime on a single issue. But how do you actually turn that into action? And especially against the backdrop of a academic administration that is going to do everything it can to facilitate the opposite.
That's a tricky one, man. I think what this open letter experience has taught me is that students are the key. What I'm seeing with the Palestine group that we have at UOA, and I know it's a similar experience at other campuses, is that they're doing things on their own terms. They're not waiting for academics who can't be relied to do jack shit with regard to justice. I know there's all sorts of sentiments out there that, we should have grace with them because they have a lot to lose. But I think that's a cop-out. And students are rightfully taking their own direct action. So I have a lot of faith in what they're doing and they're organizing. For us, it's real, like for staff, at least the way I see our roles as faculty members, is just continuing to push the administration to release a joint statement, and the unions as well. I'm just going to put the union on a bit of blast here because they've been extremely problematic with the statements that they've released, which have called it like a conflict, Israel-Gaza conflict, and made all sorts of false equivalencies just to seek balance, which is terrible. But we, within the scope of what we can do within those professional capacities, need to push these organizations to release these press statements, because I think they can, maybe this is me being a bit delusional or optimistic, but I think they can sway politicians and current, government administration to divest from the US and whatever perceived connection it has with all these big powers, to call, for a ceasefire and to support the ICJ action.
Yeah, I think this is something that Tamim Shaltoni, who's been on the podcast a couple of times now, is always underlining, is that we're getting out every week to march. We're getting information out there. People are doing press releases. It's not out of the goodness of their hearts that politicians made a statement to even seek steps towards a ceasefire, right? They didn't do that for fun. They didn't do that because they have strong values. They did that because they'd seen numbers showing that 60% of people wanted an immediate ceasefire. And it's obviously the statement from Parliament is not good enough, but you're not going to get there unless you are building up an extensive set of public pressure.
Yeah, there was when I kind of was getting radicalized as a student.
You weren't born radicalized?
My dad is technically a member of the Wiggles, man. I don't know that I've got an organic position that's gonna, you know what I'm saying? When I was getting radicalized as a student, the kind of organizing that we were doing was under the auspices of this like organization or tendency, what do you want to call it? The claim was, we are the university, and there was a push from students, from staff, and from workers at the university against this kind of really neoliberal vision of universities, basically kind of as like vending machines for degrees that need to be run by business people in order to maximize the like ka-chunk of degrees coming out. Because like the university, and I see this now, Dylan will see this now too, as people who work here now as teachers, it's just a workplace, right? It's a workplace. And we're the ones who do the work, right? As lecturers, as students, as professional staff, as people who do the business of being a university, which is research and education. And so like that we need to push the entity called the university to do everything that it can to bring about an end to like the atrocities that are being perpetrated by the Zionist entity. But by the same token, as you were just saying, the way that we get power is by being people who've already got the power, right? Like the parliamentary statement came about because we were there saying, do this. And I think that we'll get movement out of the university when we mobilize the people who are the university. We mobilize staff and students. And students are like pretty easy to mobilize because they're like the angriest people that I've ever met. And so I think that, yeah, working through the union, doing what we can to support students, we really successful. I'm like really, really lucky, I think, to be able to do the kind of work that I do, because I get to talk with young people about the stuff that is really interesting to them, what they're really pissed off about, and what stuff makes them want to move. And then when I go to a protest, it's like I could see a homework, and we could do shoots at some of these protests. I have better attendance from my students at protests than in class sometimes, frankly. And so we're really like as academics, we're really tailing. We're in many senses, I think, coming after the real kind of work that's being done. And so I really want us to do what we can to support this organizing, like Dylan was saying, that's already taking place, whether or not we're there, whether or not we're leading anything. I don't know that we need to be leading them on this. I think that a lot of the stuff is already happening. It's really exciting. It shows, again, it shows how clearly most people understand this. Most people aren't going to sit around and go, oh, well, it's such a complicated situation. It's not that complicated. There's people getting bombed from the air and shot by drones as they try to get aid off of a truck. It's not complicated at all. Yeah. It's just figuring out like what levers have we got access to that we can use to try to like exercise an influence has been like the hard part. I think because like academics tend to be really comfortable people, right? I'm making more money now than I've ever made in my life. And I think it's very easy to worry about that, right? So I don't think that academics necessarily make up this like intrinsically revolutionary subject. Like the best guys are going to be people who like write articles for a living. Unlikely. But what I will point out though is that the intelligentsia has always been a really significant element of every revolutionary movement, right? Everywhere. The Bolshevik Party in Russia, for the most part, were not factory workers. Lenin, Trotsky, like a bunch of the core organizing members of what became the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, were all book people. People like Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, was a teacher who had been a tutor. And so there is a really important part that we can play in these kinds of struggles, but I think it's really important also not to say, or not to kind of delude ourselves into thinking that if we like write a good article that everyone's hearts are going to change. But we can write a good enough article that gets people mad enough that they mobilize. And then it doesn't matter if the ruling class's hearts change, right? We don't need to worry about people's hearts. We need to worry about their hands. And if we do a good enough job educating, mobilizing people, we're going to force their hands. We've done it before.
I want to dip into that a little bit more around trying to move within the university or within the kind of wider network of academies, because it does seem like something here in this country, and I don't know if it's a New Zealand exceptionalism thing. I don't know if it's something specific to us, but you're talking about as a workplace, and as the workers, you can kind of try and pressure it from within. But who's your boss, right? Like, it's not the vice chancellor, really. It's dispersed in a way that is almost designed to stop you from doing this kind of stuff. I know I'm asking questions I don't know if they're going to be able to be answered, but how do you get past that alongside some of the things you're talking about, Emmy, around academics either just kind of feeling stuck or feeling too comfortable in their position to organize in the first place?
Yeah, I guess my hot take or my quick thought in response to that is that for those of us that are truly committed to decolonial, anti-capitalist, anti-racist work, we are very much prepared to lose our jobs and to make sacrifices, but that's a really tricky tightrope, especially for those of us with families and having to provide for them. But that is what the university does. I think it works to suppress decolonial, anti-racist spaces and thought, particularly those that are having the potential to actually have material impacts on political decisions. So I guess for me personally, it's being aware that many people don't feel that way. People don't have that deep spiritual connection. I think for those of us that are Indigenous, that are deeply committed to our Palestinian siblings, we see solidarity as our lifeblood. That it's something that we don't know what the purpose of our careers and what our lives are if we're not dedicated to this movement, prepared to be disciplined, to be suspended, and even fired. Emmy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a super interesting one, right? I think it's funny because like on the one hand, you often get really radical kind of announcements or like statements or like affirmations of belief from academics. But in terms of like how good are we at actually like mobilizing and like using that power? Actually, like not very, right? I think I'm really lucky in that because I'm ensconced here, secure in the social sciences. We have like 100% union membership, right? Like I don't think I've ever had to like threaten to rough anyone up to get them to join the union. Nor would I, because I don't endorse use of violence. And so like we, I think here do a good job of like actually doing things that we actually think we say that we believe in. But I think that the university as a system is designed to produce people who say stuff that will read well, or which will like produce good prose and good publications, but that which they have no intention of actually living by. And so I think like stuff like the union and like community organizing is really important because it forces you to go, do I actually think this? Am I actually going to commit to the bit, or am I going to just say things? So like I've kind of done this backwards. A lot of people sit down and read books for their whole life, get a lecture job, and then like, I'm now important and it's time for people to listen to me. And I've kind of come from community organizing for people against prisons Aotearoa, where my opinions have always been meant shit and no one has ever wanted to listen to me. And so like I'm quite happy saying things that I think, because if I don't think it, I'm not going to say it, because the stakes of saying something you don't believe in is that you're going to get called a dumb bitch on the news by someone. It better be for something that you actually believe in. And so I think that as academics, we kind of have to really like, the time is now, I think, as the right gets more and more willing to just harass anyone who says anything that they don't like, to really like commit to what we're saying, to commit to what we're thinking and live by it. Having said that, I got hired here last week and I'd like not to get fired this week. So let's hang on as long as we can.
That thing you said about that sort of being willing to say the things but not do the sort of mahi behind it, I feel like it's a very elevated thing, specifically in New Zealand, or should I say Aotearoa New Zealand, because we have this this sort of very, very comparatively progressive approach to Indigenous politics in New Zealand. When you look at something like America or a nightmare like Australia, and then you see how far we've sort of come. But what it means is we've opened the door for a sort of new class of equally useless but less offensive form of sort of that performative progress, that sort of performative anti-colonial stuff, where you'll have people who they'll learn their mihi, they'll learn their pepe, they'll use some reo and things, and then they'll implement the most sort of bizarre racist things you've ever heard. Or I mean, I worked at council for a while, and some of the most like racist shit I've ever heard in my life came out of the mouths of people that I was working with at an organization that forced you to go to like a New Zealand history and colonization lecture as part of your onboarding process, because it's we have this like mentality, I think, in New Zealand of, well, we've clocked it, we've sort of figured it out. I couldn't possibly make a stupid racist mistake. I couldn't possibly be failing to understand this thing that I went to a single day course on. And so I think Australia and stuff, they don't really have that same thing, because they're just like, oh, we don't care. We hate our Indigenous people. But in New Zealand, we have this like, oh, of course we love them. Of course we love them. Of course we care about all these things. But in practical sense, they don't.
Yeah, in New Zealand, it feels like quietly calling someone a racist is the equivalent of getting in their face and screaming their account.
That's why I skipped
really
right to the
does.
second thing.
like just the responses of that, like, no, I don't think a week goes past where I don't see something or someone saying we're not a racist country, which is just the most absurd statement possible, but it's very much part of the DNA, right, of discourse here.
Yeah, I think I've told you about this, Carl, was that incident when I had at council, where I noticed a sort of slightly racist discrepancy in how they were doing information collecting, where they were sort of not bothering to collect specific granular information on tangata whenua when they were doing polling for user audiences for stuff. And I sort of very, very gently sort of tried to raise this with the people who had done it, and they just flew off the handle, like literally like screaming in my face, angry. Because I hadn't even called them racist. I just said, hey, look, you've overlooked something that's pretty obvious to me. But it is funny where there's this impression of being so good at something that as soon as it gets called into question, people get really, really sensitive. They get really worked up about it because they don't like the idea that maybe they're not as, they haven't got it quite as clocked as they thought they did.
So I guess the other question coming out of the way that we're responding to this, whether that's within the academy or other civic groups or just New Zealand public as a whole, responding to Gaza, that is, and the genocide there, is how do we tie that, like, say our organizing is going well, right? Say, we are mobilizing people. And I think to an extent that is true. Things are moving. But how do we tie that back or forward to a movement around decolonialism, around the Indigenous people, both of Aotearoa and the Pacific, and actually start laying out a base set of values that people can organize around here en masse, and be drawn to, given the way that New Zealanders tend to respond to this kind of critique, or like as light as it may be.
Yeah, it's a really good question because I see a lot of the mobilizing and organizing right now is rightfully around a ceasefire, around like specifically with lawyers, around getting New Zealand to support or intervene in the ICJ case against Israel. But what I would like to see and what I see as kind of necessary for decolonization is for us to imagine a world beyond international law, beyond this current order where the US is able to veto Security Council resolutions and the US and Israel are able to render any ICJ advisory opinion or General Assembly resolution powerless. I think we need to adopt that revolutionary and imaginative ethic, which I think is really hard for many people to do because we're so attached, whether, in material ways or just mentally and spiritually attached to the current apparatus at international law and at the state level corporations and all of that. But we do need to revisit our theories of change. I think what this moment is showing us is that decolonization absolutely requires armed resistance, that we can't compromise or negotiate or debate our way to freedom, to our own liberation within these democratic institutions which are designed to fail. So it's really important that we don't just fight for the immediate stuff, which is crucially important to prevent further murder in Palestine and around the world, but that we keep our eyes focused on dismantling and building something better.
Yeah, totally. Beautiful, dude. Yeah, I think in terms of like what are we gonna do, right? Like what is to be done? Like question that Leninists always like to invoke because we think it makes us sound a bit like Lenin. I hope it did. Like what is to be done, right? In this immediate situation for us here now, you're sitting in your car or like on the toilet listening to this. What do we have to do? And I think immediately, right, right now, we don't have a clear means of organizing. We've got a lot, and I'm part of this, and I'm like, we've got a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different kinds of work, right, on all kinds of different issues. But we don't have a revolutionary organization that's directing and harnessing all of this energy, all of this like really beautiful energy coming out of people who I like love and who I am and who I respect, for the destruction of the capitalist class in this country. And until we have that, until we have a revolutionary party, we just aren't going to be able to do the thing that we need to do in order to get out of the situation. We had a communist party in this country, and from what I can tell, they spent 60 years arguing about whether the Soviet Union or China was better, decided that Albania was better, and then dissolved themselves. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it. But until we have a revolutionary party that's able to do the crucial task before us as the proletariat, we can't get out of this, right? New Zealand is always going to be stuck in this position as like a junior imperialist partner to the West, sitting out here in the Pacific, acting basically as an unsinkable Navy base and aircraft carrier for the US in the event of hot war with China. And we're never going to be able to be anything other than that unless we can break ties with the US. So I think for building a revolutionary organization and then splitting apart from the Western imperialist bloc are like the crucial tasks before us. And exactly like Dylan said, that's a really hard thing to do, which is why I think all of our forebears spent so long arguing in book club instead. Because like it's tough to do. It's tough to find time for, and speaking as like a mother of a toddler, it's really hard to find time for anything. It's why we're doing this in everyone else's lunch breaks. Thanks, guys. It's hard to do, but we have to commit ourselves to this task and figure out how we can make revolutionary organizing work for us. Because I don't know that when we face immediate horrors like the genocide in Gaza, I don't know that letting the capitalist class be in charge and asking them to do the right thing is working. So far, it doesn't seem like it's working, and next time it's probably not going to work, and the time after that it's probably not going to work, and then we will all be dead due to climate change. So we need to get our hands on the wheel, and we need to do it as soon as we practically can.
Yeah.
It is that thing of like how willing people are to just continually ask for permission to do the right thing and be slapped down and then just go back and ask again. Because, yeah, the whole time you're talking about, I'm thinking about the sort of climate protests where the bare minimum, they're like blocking a road and people are like, well, I believe in climate change, but you can't be blocking a road. And it's just like, do you believe in climate change? Like, do you understand what's at stake here? That like a bare minimum minor inconvenience type protest is a red line for you, but the mass extinction event is not. And tying it back to Gaza as well is the idea that like people can't tolerate the idea of Ansar Allah having these sort of non-murderous. They're not killing people. They're just blockading Israeli ships in the Red Sea. And people are like, well, I supported the Palestinian cause, but I can't get behind this. And it's just like, really? Like, how squeamish are you that like even these non-murderous, these protests in which we're not killing people and we're taking objectively moral action in order to prevent mass death of the future is too much for so many people. That's the needle that I think is really needing to be pushed right now, is helping people get out of that mindset of overcoming that sort of bare minimum of what needs to be done just to survive the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I've seen what NATO has allowed itself to justify on the back of the genocide, like, and yeah, as you say, people getting squeamish over a blockade. 30,000 Palestinians are dead. Like, get fucked.
But I think, right, this what Oliver was just saying, I think this comes back to what Dylan and I started talking about here, right? Which is that people need not to be squeamish. And that's a problem of communication, right? Of education and communication. I think like we're educators, you guys are communicators. And so I think that we're like quite well placed, I think, to kind of understand this problem. First of all, that people don't have like the theoretical base to understand what's going on here. Many people won't know who Ansar Allah are. They're not going to understand the regional conflict at all. And that's the kind of stuff that academics should, when we're doing our jobs well, be able to help people to understand. And people aren't like getting opinions, they're not getting news, and they're not having it contextualized for them in an appropriate way that helps them to come to the conclusion. They're like, yes, we do support Yemeni pirates, like freedom fighters. They're doing the exact right thing. They're doing what we would be able to do in this situation. That's something that communicators can do a really good job of. And so when we kind of think of, when I think of myself and as someone who works in a university system, and I think like, what's the best that I can do? Yes, there's like my job, which is important to me, and I think I do a good job of it. But the underside of that is really important to me too. The underside of like helping students reach these radical conclusions and giving them the political education that they're going to need going into the rest of the 21st century, God help us, to be able to understand and face the crises that are coming. And that's not my job, right? When I got hired here, some of the like rose gallery of freaks and weirdos that populate this country got really upset about me getting hired. Good, right? I want them to hate me. But like the claim was made that like, well, I'm just here to indoctrinate your children. Bro, I can't get my students to read most of the time. Straight up. I have as much control over them as I do my toddler, right? They're not reading anything they don't want to read. They're not considering any opinions they don't want to consider. So if someone comes to university and leaves it, a committed communist revolutionary, it's because they were ready to become a communist revolutionary, and I had nothing to do with that transformation, right? The fact is that people will become revolutionaries when the objective conditions of their society require them to do so, make it become historically inevitable. And no one, just no matter how intelligent or persuasive or funny or well-spoken or sexy, perhaps, she is, can cause that to occur, right? I can't indoctrinate your kid. Can't do it. We can't do it. What we can do is help them come to the conclusions that they're reaching for by themselves. And I think that's something that academics can do. I think something that communicators can do. I think something that media should do and could do more of. But it's by no means an impossible task, right? It is, in fact, the task before us. So
I think that comes back to what you're saying about needing some kind of revolutionary organ, right? Whether it's a party or some other administrative group, because it becomes historically inevitable that something will happen, and that people will get angry enough, or the conditions kind of enacted upon them make them desperate enough to take action of some sort. And that's not necessarily to overthrow capitalism. And that's the flip side to a lot of this, and the people that we're talking about as being our enemies and who hate us, is that they're also trying to harness that energy. You know, they're also trying to find these people who are angry, who are pissed off at the status quo, who are desperate, and turn that into political energy. And they already have those organizations.
Well, I mean, look at the Parliament protest stuff when they were out on the lawn. That's a perfect example of our enemies sort of capturing that rage, capturing that sort of, and leading them down a complete garden path to nonsense, but taking a group of people who were justly frustrated with the situation that they were in, justly frustrated with the fact that our government, our Labour government, was not really looking out for the interests of the working class during that crisis. And instead of them being sort of funneled into something practical or useful, they set fire to a swing set. But that being that example of if we're not there, someone else will be.
Well, I think we've solved it all, folks. That's enough for the episode. Thanks so much for joining our think tank. And a paper will be out later in the week, I'm sure, outlining that. But were there any, in seriousness though, were there any final things that you wanted to add, Dylan or Emmy?
No, just that final point that you guys are making around those squeamish folks, those folks who are really deeply committed to respectability politics. I think they need to be antagonized. They need to be called out because I think they do a lot of harm. And so it's really important, I think, to test them about their commitments to the state and what underpins those commitments and their theories of change. Because in the legal profession, those folks are really prevalent, and they do a lot of work in terms of stopping the mobilization of more radical lawyers who are wanting to do work for Palestine. So I think not being afraid to challenge and antagonize those folks is really important as well, because they hold a lot of power and they do a lot for the state.
And it's not always clear that they are an enemy, right?
Mm.
Because we're conditioned to think of certain reactions or personality types or psychology as being the antagonist. When someone just says, "Oh, I think we should calm down and be a bit more rational about this," it doesn't immediately set off your alarm bells. But sometimes it should.
100%.
Emmy, any final points from you as well?
No, I'm just like, I'm so excited that Dylan came on here. Just because I think Dylan, like, you're the bomb. And I think that you've got a lot of really important stuff to say, and I think that this is like the perfect outlet for it. So I'm really, really pleased that we got to have this conversation. I think that we're in such a crucial like juncture now socially when we're seeing just the worst horrors. I think I've seen more dead children than alive children lately, right? I think that's the same for all of us.
Mm.
And if we can't do anything about this, like, we have just abdicated our humanity, right? So I'm really pleased to that there's a platform here for people to hear from Dylan, because I think that he's a really, really important thinker, and I love you, dude.
Right, they get you. Emmy's my queen, and I'm a big fan of this podcast. So yeah, keep up the input, Mahi. We can do it.
Perfect. And if people want to find your work elsewhere, Dylan, where can they do that?
Good question. I think for academics, we just have like a page where you Google us and it comes up with all our publications. But because universities are just corporations who hide all our work behind paywalls, if you want a copy of anything that I've written, just email me. My email address should be there, and I'll send it to you.
Fantastic. And thanks also to my co-host, Ollie. Thanks for joining us. And finally, thank you to our audience. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of 1 of 200. If you've enjoyed this, if you think these voices are worth getting out there to a wider population, share it. Let people know that these kind of conversations are occurring. We're on Twitter, Instagram. I think we're kind of on TikTok, but somewhat defunct until I get people who are better than me to run it effectively.
You got to start doing makeup tutorials, man.
I got to start doing fucking anything
The dance
for
videos,
starters.
explaining stuff while dancing.
Yeah, like I just eating on screen. I think would be better than what's currently happening there. Which
Revolutionary
is
mukbang
almost
videos.
nothing. Yeah, you got it, man. ASMR, just quietly whispering Lennon into the microphone. That's been another episode. We'll catch you on the weekend for current events. See you later.
Live in a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say. When they quote this as a cost, we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day.